session titled Community Energy, and it's taking practical climate action. So much needed session. Okay, so I'll hand it over to Marianne, and there will be time for Q&A from about 22. Okay.
Cool. Hiya, so my name's Marianne Brown. I work for Bristol Energy Cooperative. It's really great to be part of this festival. It's very, very energising to hear about all the amazing work that folk are doing in our city. We're here to talk specifically about energy, of course, and to gather some more of that momentum. So what is community energy? Community energy is projects where energy is owned, it's created for, by and with the community, wholly owned or controlled by communities or through partnerships with commercial or public sector partners. So what does it mean in practice? It means low energy bills, it means less pollution, it means spending money closer to home, and also it means securing local consent for planning permission, which can be really important when we're trying to scale up renewable energy projects. So with me, I've got three people who are really at the cutting edge of community energy development in Bristol. First of all, I'll start with Mark Pepper, and it's great to have him on the stage talking about community energy. I'm sure if you're from Bristol, you will be aware of the very big wind turbine on the outskirts of the city in Weston. Mark Pepper has been a really important part of that story right from the beginning. So he's here to share a little bit about that story with us. Mark, can you just tell us a little bit about how the community own the wind turbine and what community benefit means to the people of Weston when it comes to the wind turbine?
How? Through 9 years of bloody hard work, to be honest. But before I fully answer that question, I think it might be interested or useful to know why we embarked on this massive challenge. So, as you've been told, my name is Mark Pepper. I represent a group of residents in North Bristol, in an area called Weston, which is home to around about 7,200 residents, sharing around about 3,500 homes. So quite a small community, basically. Way back in 2012, the residents came together because austerity measures were kicking in, services were hemorrhaging, and we were feeling a little bit forgotten about. So we decided to get off our backsides and make the changes that we want to see ourselves. So we consulted with every resident on the estate and said, what's three things, basically? What's good about Weston, what's not so good, and what needs improving. Took all that information, put it into a development plan. So it's now our aim as a group of residents to go and deliver that development plan. We knew there's a lot of really ambitious plans within that plan, and that we would need money. Hence the wind turbine, basically. So we didn't embark on delivering a wind turbine for climate reasons, for ecological reasons. It is just a case of we were skint and we needed some money, basically. That was one of the local assets that we thought that could lend itself to generating that economic sustainability that we so desperately needed. So, hope that gives you a bit of context of why we've got the largest wind turbine, onshore wind turbine in England. How, like I said, I'm not joking, it was 9 years of really hard work by a lot of really far more clever people than me. Weston is an area of high deprivation, so there's not a lot of skills and knowledge there. So the first thing we had to do was to go out and try and create a group with those skills and knowledge needed to take on such a massive task, really. So that's step one. Step two was, because we were already a charity and an organisation in its own right, to deliver a wind turbine was quite challenging, with quite a lot of liability. So we wanted to remove that liability from the main organisation, from delivering the types of social support that we were delivering. So we set up a CIC as a vehicle to go out and deliver this wind turbine. So now we've got the knowledge, we've got the governance and the structure. We now need a bit of money. So development finance was a massive challenge. We went out and got the development finance. We then went out and got junior debt, and then that led on to senior debt. But none of that was possible without the planning and the land to build a wind turbine on. So that was another job that we needed to do, was to find suitable, accessible land to put a wind turbine on, and then find how challenging it was with the planning system and get over that, basically. So basically that's what we've done. We built up a team, built up the governance and structure, went out and applied for some money based on our sort of levels of deprivation and stats, forced it through planning, and now there we are. We've had the wind turbine turning for about a year now, generating an income, not for us just yet, but for the investors that have invested in it. So the benefits to the area, you asked. The benefits is, the accolade of owning the largest wind turbine in England. It's also enabled us to make our residents more aware of climate issues and the fact that what they were delivering, community development, is exactly that, climate. But we're coming at it from two different narratives with two slightly different objectives, where perhaps climate activists want to see a reduction in carbon. So do we, but not because of the carbon, but because of the amount of money that carbon cost us. So it's all about poverty and money in our pocket. So they will be seeing a return. Our initial plans was to make sure that everyone in Lawrence Weston had cheaper energy. Regulations wouldn't allow that, and the cost was prohibitive as well, which was a godsend, because in our local area we've also delivered a neighbourhood development plan. We're encouraging a lot more new houses being built, and the last thing we wanted, or I wanted, was to give everyone cheaper energy, because that would artificially raise the cost of housing for our own residents, because if you can get cheap energy, it's more attractive, so it'll push the price up. So we're really pleased that we didn't go down that route. Also, the other addition to that is the money that's coming in from that, that's coming back into the community, is more flexible. So we haven't got to spend it just on people's bills. And it's only a certain amount of people that pay those bills. So there's other issues within the community that need addressing as well. So we had that flexibility to act more responsively with that resource to support our residents, basically. So that's it. The accolade, the pride of place, and ultimately, cash.
Brilliant. Thank you. Your project really shows the importance of that sort of determined community engagement and really knowing the people who live in your area, or really listening to people and what they need and what they want, rather than, as you say, approaching it from there's a climate crisis. This will will help address the climate crisis. 9 years is a long time. Can you tell us a bit about how you started? Like, how did you approach people? Like, how did you present it? And also, in 9 years, how did you keep people going, and how did you keep them interested and motivated in this project?
Through threats of violence, basically. We told them they had to do it. No, we... So, yeah, like you said, it was 9 years of our graft. So we first contacted, because we had no knowledge, like I say, of building a wind turbine, so we used the knowledge that is held within Bristol Energy Network. So people within that know these things, they move in those circles. We paid a little bit of money to employ someone that was representing Bristol Energy Network, a guy called David Tudgy. Asked him to go out and build that team that I was talking about with the right skills and experience. So it was those people that have really led to it.
How did you keep the community kind of interested and motivated in this project?
Well, initially the community, the vast majority of the community, weren't interested. When we did that community development plan and when we went out and surveyed them all, climate never come up at all. Renewable energy didn't come up at all. They felt they had more pressing issues. And in fact, when we tried to talk to them about climate, they switched off. They felt that it wasn't them just jetting across the universe in airplanes. So they felt they were being asked to change their behaviours where they weren't in a position to change their behaviours. So we've had to go around making people more aware around climate issues and keeping them engaged by showing them their priorities are exactly climate. So for an example, people want us to try and beautify the area. So we gave them the plants and stuff, but we also linked them in with a horticulturalist who said, right, this is your priority, you want to make it look pretty, but did you know by changing this plant and that plant, you'll improve the biodiversity? So it's a bit like climate action by stealth, but always concentrating on their priorities, and I think that's what kept them involved. It was a massive journey to make them aware of climate issues, so we ran a lot of workshops, a lot of information sessions, so yeah, just a lot of hard work, really. Yeah,
a lot of hard work. That's amazing. Thank you so much. I'll move on to Stuart Phelps now, and he's got the story of he's been an integral part of another community energy project, which is a bit different to Mark's in that it started with sort of acts of resistance, didn't it, to two power plant proposals in the area of Barton Hill near Feeder Road. Over several years, there was community campaigns, very effective and very powerful to resist to these two power plants, and you ended up with a community-owned battery storage project, the community benefit of which is going towards a new project which Stuart is leading, which is really fascinating, and it really goes to show the importance of community energy in developing technologies which can be adaptable really to meet the needs of a local community, and just at the absolute cutting edge of where we need to be in tackling the climate crisis. So Stuart, can you begin by just telling us a little bit about what this project that you're doing? It's called the Barton Heat Project. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is?
Sure. One of the nice things about following on from Mark is all I have to say is what he said, but the difference is. We're working in Barton Hill, which some of you may know. It's a collection of tower blocks. It's got 55% of children living in those tower blocks are in child poverty. So everything Mark was saying about it's about poverty, it's about fuel costs, it's about cost of living applies to what we're doing as well. The difference, I think, is we are trying to work out how you decarbonise 8 tower blocks, including the oldest tower block in the city. How you do that by sliding some sort of cooperative in between the city council as landlord and Vattenfall as the ultimate supplier of a big district heating system. And we can't, unfortunately, get away with sticking a windmill on Netham Park, because much as I would like to do it, I suspect people might say, hang on a minute, that's the middle of the city, and you can't have a bigger one than him. What we're going to be playing with are toys like the feeder canal, which gives us the ability to do a large amount of water source heat pumps. We've got to look at ground source heat pumps and air source heat pumps, PV, all the rest of it. We're trying to use the tools we have and the toys we have to both break some of the rules, like why aren't tower blocks used as vertical solar farms, break some of the prejudices. There's a predominantly Asian and Somali population where I'm working, and there's an assumption they don't care about climate change, and to lever in the universities, higher education, all of the project work, people like me, people like Bristol Energy Network, to come in and get the kids to start thinking about futures that they don't think are currently open to them. And I'll go back on what I've just said in some sense. I talked about playing with toys, and we deliberately are not saying this is how it will be done. We're getting teams of students to come in, work on projects, and that way we're getting bright young things coming in, saying something slightly different but also slightly the same, and it helps reinforce and grow the message. But we are dealing with a very organised population, because what you've got to understand when there's conversations around stopping fossil fuel power plants on St Philip's Marsh, it was the people who worked on the marsh and the people who lived in Barton Hill who did all the heavy lifting. They're the ones that got fired up. They're the ones that said no compromise. And they went in for a full-scale battle. And we can build on that. The other thing to bear in mind is a lot of my neighbours and a lot of people I'm working with are Muslim. And at the moment, if you know anybody within that community, the shock waves from losing thousands of people to heat exhaustion whilst on pilgrimage in Mecca last month is still working its way through. I don't have the same problem that Mark has in terms of how do I explain climate change. I have a problem in terms of getting people to accept that what I say when I'm talking about climate change is the climate change they're talking about in their conversations with families abroad. Because sadly, the climate change debate in this country is controlled in a particular way that doesn't resonate if you're a Somali or a Pakistani woman who's trying to sort out the family finances, who's got kids sharing beds because you're overcrowded, and you're being told the solution is a bike, when in reality you've got to get 3 different kids to 3 different schools and get to Amazon over where Mark is to do a shift. And that conversation is probably where we get stuck.
Can you tell us a bit about the Barton Heat project? Like, why do the community need it? And also, I mean, we heard from Mark about how he engaged with people. How is this project being designed for the community as well as with the community?
What we're doing is, first off, we operate out of a cafe in the middle of the estate. And we stick what little we have by way of information up on the wall in the cafe. That way we are seen to be open and within the community. The cafe itself is the one that always turns into the 24-hour emergency when one of the tower blocks gets closed. So it's right in the heart. We didn't intend, when we started the recent conversation, to be looking at a full-blown community energy project, because it was a conversation around what can you do with £15,000 to address the issues on the estate. And with the best will in the world, nobody can set up a community energy project with £15,000. What we forgot was we were pushing on an open door in a number of directions. I've talked about how deprived the area is. 1950s, 60s, 70s, concrete system-built structures, whether they're council tower blocks, estates, offices, whatever, all have the same fundamental problem. And if we don't solve how to decarbonise those structures, we're going to have to start doing an awful lot of rebuilding, or everything we build from here on in is going to have to be Passive House Plus. And so the second after the conversation about let's put some money in, we discovered that every university we talked to, all the people in the industry are all very keen to get involved in how this could be done, because they see the kind of the knock-on effects. So originally what we were going to do was hold a conversation with the estate that said, you're going to have to decarbonise, and frankly your current heating systems are so dire you want out of them anyway. They are the one size fits all, it's on or it's off. If it's too hot you open the window, if it's too cold you freeze type. At some point there will be a district heating system coming around, it will connect up to the tower blocks. What is it you want out of that? And that's the conversation we thought we'd have. But what we've actually ended up doing is going, well, that is only part of it. There's all sorts of opportunities coming up. Some of you may have realised the new government has just announced they want to put more money into community energy co-ops. That opens up all sorts of doors for us. The fascinating part of the exercise for me is I probably do more conversations and work in the street than I do in an office, because I'm a white male from outside of the family. If I'm talking to a Somali woman, she's going to be much happier talking to me in a public place. So we end up talking in the street, and it gets hilarious at times, because the minute you start doing that, everybody else joins in. And as long as it's not raining, you go to all sorts of strange places in that conversation, but it comes back full circle to I'm living in a cold, damp building. Some of you will have picked up that Bristol City Council's housing department has just been named as one of the 4 worst for repairs and dealing with emergency issues and basic health and safety issues like having a carbon monoxide monitor in the flat. So you've got a high level of damp, cold, and so on, and that's our way into a conversation family by family with what do you want to move to? And of course the real solution is insulate, ventilate, ventilate, but also change the way the heat's coming in.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite incredible, the conversations that you're having, and I guess it's to give people a sense that they can do something about it, that these conversations will actually go on to something. I mean, how do you kind of energise people in that way?
We're doing it by working with other people that are already working in the area, by working through the different networks and the groups and the conversations. And we're building on very simple, basic building blocks. Every parent wants their child to have a better life. So every time we can bring a child into contact with higher education in some bizarre way, it's opening doors, it's opening conversations. And I will give a very simple little anecdote that is not quite this project, but it illustrates what can happen. We were working with a group of children, putting together sensors so that they could look at air quality. And all they had to do was plug all the little bits together. And if you've ever tried doing that without soldering anything, you discover that 7-year-olds' fingers work better than my bunch of bananas. So one of the not particularly well-behaved young gentlemen was fascinated by this process, and everybody's going, yes, thank God for that. And he's getting into a very serious conversation with the woman who's helping him, and they're on first name terms and so on and so forth. And Laura says to him, you know, when you take this home, what are you going to do with it? And he said, I want to do this, do that. And then she said, well, why don't you think about doing something slightly different? So kid disappears off. A couple of weeks later, comes back, goes, when's Laura coming back? Because I've been talking to my dad, and he thinks that's a really good idea. And I said, well, I don't really know. But I'll find out. But she is busy. Okay, right. Well, she's busy. What does she do? Oh, she's the Associate Professor of Engineering at the University of West of England. The look on that kid's face was priceless. Suddenly, there was somebody who did a job he didn't really understand, really wanted to know what he thought. And that had probably never happened to that kid before. And it's that kind of game that we play. And it is a game, but it's a serious game. Gets people thinking in different ways. And the other thing we do, and we have committed ourselves to doing, is we will have some kind of voting structure in the organisation we set up. And if the majority of people vote for X, we will deliver X. And if they discover X is wrong and they want to change their minds, they can. That's an inalienable right. But it's not my job to say, you want X, but I'm going to give you Y.
Brilliant, thank you. It's really interesting to hear both of your stories, Mark and Stuart, because Mark, in a way you're kind of at the end of your journey, Mark, with the turbine. It's just about to go online, and you've had this 10 years of hard slog, and Stuart, you're just right at the beginning. Can I ask, can you imagine what it's going to be like in 10 years' time when you've gone through the hard slog that Mark talks about? What would you hope for in terms of going beyond Barton Hill?
Two things. One, that I'm still alive, because I'm at that age. And secondly, they don't name it after me. No, seriously, what I hope to see is an estate which is probably 90% still there, much as I would love to get rid of those tower blocks. It's not going to happen. That those blocks have become places that people enjoy living in rather than have to live in. And that there is a steady stream of people working alongside companies like Beck, working alongside the universities, working alongside the installers and companies, and building careers for themselves that take them and their entire family out of the poverty cycle. Mm-hmm. And if you think about asynchrony as working, and then you think about traditional family structures like, it's a stereotype, but it's the stereotypical Somali woman who's focused on raising the kids. As those kids grow older, she's got time on her hands. She's perfectly capable of doing a whole lot of stuff. If we can just step up her IT access, she can work remotely in any number of different jobs. And the renewable energy sector, if you ask anybody, will tell you is grossly short of staff. When I started playing with Barton Heat, I sort of said to Marianne, it's a draft job description, and it had 5 years' experience, and it got thrown back as nobody's got 5 years' experience. That I would love to see as the estate has changed. The other thing that's already happening, and it's happened for Mark with Lawrence Weston, is areas of the city that people are quite negative about suddenly get interest, reputation, discussion in other contexts. So a whole load of people know now about Lawrence Weston as being the biggest windmill. They don't actually know all the nasty things that people have said about Lawrence Weston over the years. They don't know all the nasty things that people are saying about Barton Hill if they are coming from the Hong Kong Baptist University, who we've just hooked up with on an international study involving Seoul, Hong Kong and Bristol. Now, that changes the view of the estate. It changes the way people feel.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. That's really inspiring. You mentioned a little bit about the policy, about the change in government. I mean, that's been quite big news over the last week, in case anyone missed it. So I'm going to talk to Helen now. Helen Martin is CEO of Bristol Energy Co-op, who I also work for, you might have spotted. Bristol Energy Co-op, Beck, we're one of the more active community energy groups in England. We've got 20 clean energy projects. We've got a solar farm, we've got rooftop solar, we've got a battery storage project. And we're in the middle of our 10th share offer as well, so you can also join the movement. And if you would like to, please do ask us afterwards. Now, I want to talk to you, Helen, about Beck has been, a leading community energy group for over a decade, since 2011, and faced many obstacles in the world of government policy. So obviously, and a big one has been lack of political will. The last week, things might have changed a little bit. Can you just tell us a little bit, I guess, what your hopes are that some of these obstacles will be addressed?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Marianne. It is a super exciting time for community energy right now. As Marianne says, we've pretty much had years in the policy wilderness. I mean, Beck got going in 2011, and at that time there was actually quite a lot of support structures for community energy organisations like ours, like particularly the feed-in tariff, which gave us a subsidised and guaranteed price that we were able to sell the power that we generated. That also applied to domestic installations, so you might well know people, or you might yourselves have solar panels on your roofs from that time when you knew you could get a good return for doing that. And all of that went away, basically, with the end of the coalition government in the sort of mid-2010s. And you can see that, like, the growth in community energy generation just flatlined at that point. Now, in Bristol, we've actually been pretty lucky in the interim. Bristol City Council, for its faults, has been pretty committed to net zero and specifically supportive and gets the role that community energy can play, as is the case for the West of England Combined Authority, WECA. And obviously you've heard from a couple of amazing examples of community energy that have happened or are happening in the interim. So it's not like nothing has happened and Beck has carried on and the economics of the sector are changing. So it's not, we have been doing what we can, but it does feel like we've got the potential now. We hope we're in a bit of a new world. The Labour, in their sort of policy, in their manifesto, had made local and community energy a big part of their energy transition plans, which was obviously itself a big part of their headline policy commitments. They have said that their local power plan will include investing £1 billion a year in local and community energy. And that will be, being hopeful, game-changing. Just the scale vis-a-vis, community energy total investment since, in the last decade or more has probably come to sort of the hundreds of millions. So this is literally game-changing scale of support. It isn't just about the money. There are other policies that we need and that we hope to see, but that we don't yet know what will happen. So things that would really help would obviously be, for example, as the onshore wind ban de facto onshore wind ban has been lifted, will there be a requirement or an encouragement, an explicit incentive to have community ownership as part of those as part of those projects. So that's obviously something that would, again, really transform the sector. For those of you who follow the energy sector, you'll know that the grid constraints the ability for a new renewable energy project to get connected to the grid so we can export the power is it's a mess, basically. And so another thing that would really help us would be to recognise that and allow, at the moment, projects that are smaller than a megawatt, which many of ours are, can basically connect to the grid pretty straightforward way. And that limit's been there for decades, basically. So just pushing that up a little bit to 4, 5, 6 megawatts, 10 megawatts, so small projects that are community-owned can easily get connected to the grid would be huge. And then there's bigger picture things that affect the growth of renewable energy, like removing the distortions that put green levies on electricity instead of on gas, that kind of thing. So there's a whole host of policy changes that wouldn't actually cost anything, but that would make a massive difference for all renewable and particularly for community energy. So we will obviously continue to push for those and see where we get to. But it's clearly a new era for community energy, and we're really excited.
I mean, this kind of follows on quite a lot from that, but we often hear in terms of tackling the climate crisis that community energy isn't enough in terms of scale and speed at which we need to decarbonise. Obviously, we've got a change in policy now which changes that landscape a little bit, but I mean, what would you say to that argument now?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's not enough. I mean, like I said, the total sector capacity we have right now is about 350 megawatts. That's maybe one large offshore wind farm. But we need both. And I think the key thing is that to get to net zero, we know we need to build energy assets in and around where people live. And that's kind of going to become increasingly important, because what that gives you is not just the electrons onto the grid close by to where, but the fact that they're being generated close by to where they're being used. Has the potential to build a kind of resilience and a flexibility into the grid that will be a big part of helping us get over those grid constraints that I mentioned. I mean, our system was basically built, our national grid system was built for a few very large coal-fired plants generating power that was then transmitted to urban centres. And what we have now is an opportunity to switch that and really generate power in and around where people are. But to do that, and for that to be fair, obviously we need those people to be brought along with it. So it's so net zero. So taking action, the energy transition, getting to net zero is something that we are doing, not something that's being done to us. And so that's where I think community energy has a massive part to play. I mean, like the headline of the session says, it's really about it can be about taking practical action. It's something really concrete that we can do that feels meaningful in scale in the face of a crisis that can easily seem completely overwhelming. And I think action begets action. And so it's obviously Bristol Energy Co-op is not going to by itself transform Ambition Lawrence Weston or the Barton Heat, but we're not by ourselves, we're small. But as one is, your neighbour sees what's being done and that gets replicated again across the country, then yeah, I think we can get to the point where we're making a really meaningful contribution to the transition we need, and not just to making the transition, but to making the transition just.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. I think it's really important to focus on that aspect of public opinion, and we've heard from Stuart and we've heard from Mark about how these conversations around democratising energy through community energy can really bring people together and really change the way people feel about where they live, and how they engage with issues like the climate crisis, which are huge issues that can just, as we all know, can make you just feel helpless. And if you've got a million other things to worry about in your day, when are you going to have time and headspace to think about that? Can I just very quickly ask you, Stuart and Mark, just what you would say to somebody now with your experience who was thinking about setting up a similar project? Would you have any tips to share?
Why not?
That's enough, yeah.
It's as simple as, if you don't, somebody else is going to. So do you want to do it to yourself, or do you want to have it done to you? And unfortunately, both the communities that Mark and I work in, they are so used to having things done to them that you often spend most of your time saying, actually, you can do it. So I do a lot of talking these days about the battle against the power stations, because they did do it. And I'm sure, Mark, you've got similar examples. I mean, the one that always strikes me is your supermarket.
Yeah, that's another story.
Yeah.
For me, I think it's just to realise that you can achieve fantastically great things. Who would have thought a small, impoverished community with really low levels of skills and qualifications could have delivered the tallest wind turbine in England? We've only done that by working together, working with people like Beck, with Bristol Energy Network, and some key players within Bristol to be able to achieve that. So it sounds like a massive challenge. But if we can do it, then I'm sure there's many other communities that can do exactly the same or other great things.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. It's just great. Like I say, thank you so much for being part of the panel. If anyone has any questions, it would be great to answer some of those.
Yeah, hi there. Question for Mark. Really interested in your project. In terms of the financing, were there community investors from the local area that invested in that project? So they're going to be getting a return. And what's the projected return for yourselves as an organisation?
So with respect to local investment, no. There was none because we've got no money. So we had no money to invest. We managed to get development funding from different sources, like the local authority, like Bristol Energy Services. For those of you in Bristol who can remember the Neighbourhood Partnership, we also got some devolved money from them. We also had a massive grant from WECA of £500,000. So I guess that's the community's contribution, if you will. And then the rest came from private finance. I think 3 individual Bristol entrepreneurs who were keen to see more renewable energy. So that's how we paid for it. It cost about 5.2 million with the development costs included. What do we get back? Well, we need to pay off all the loans first. But on average, and obviously it's really hard to predict with the energy prices being so volatile, the interest rates and, all the other sort of connecting factors. But we should easily get £100,000 a year for the first 5 years. And then as those debts come down, we'll be expecting to see £200,000 a year with inflation increases for the next 25 years. So quite substantial.
I was interested to see if you guys are sort of storing energy as well, or if it's just getting plugged directly into the grid and then sort of in a roundabout way coming back to the community users, or whether you're sort of trying to directly plug into their homes in terms of a direct beneficial ownership kind of model.
Well, with respect to the wind turbine, no. So we plug it directly into the grid. We did have thoughts about that I touched on earlier around trying to deliver sort of private lines into residents' homes, but the regulations wouldn't allow it, and it is too cost prohibitive. So yeah, it just goes into the national grid. We get a financial reward, and then we can support people who are in energy need or energy poverty through that money, as well as other things. So a lot of that money still does go into, or will be going into, addressing fuel poverty. I think last year we spent, aside from the wind turbine revenue, we spent £75,000 on supporting people, especially those on prepayments who were self-disconnecting because of lack of finance. So yeah, a lot of money will go back into energy prices, but not as directly as what perhaps some people would have liked.
For Bristol Energy Co-op, we do have an investment in the grid-connected battery storage, which is the Feeder Road battery plant, which basically replaced what was going to, as we said, what was going to be a diesel-fired, what's called a peaking plant, so that provides power to the grid just when it's needed, when demand is at risk of exceeding supply. So that switched, as a result of the community action, that switched to being a plan to have a battery storage plant, and Beck's invested in that. That's one particular kind of example of storage, and that's been a huge growth area. Obviously, the grid at the national level will need a lot of battery storage, but it's also been quite stop and starty, and it's quite an unpredictable model. So we don't particularly plan to do much more of that. Where we are seeing more potential to use batteries, and we've also invested with partners in a couple of microgrids. So that's sort of a collective. Now, this is, as Mark said, it's really hard to do kind of in a retrofit way. It's really hard. Once individual houses have individual metered connections, then you're in the realm of needing to be a licensed supplier to be able to supply those homes with energy. And that's for very good reason, really highly regulated. We'd love to get, for there to be space opened up for us to be able to sell power to people who are near our assets, just somewhat directly, but that isn't really there yet. But we have experimented with, along with partners, in a couple of microgrids where there's new housing going in, where there's an ambition to make that genuinely carbon neutral or even negative, and that involves a combination of solar panels and battery storage behind a single grid connection. So you essentially are a little standalone supplier for that development, along obviously with things like collective heat pumps, hugely energy efficient homes, collective EV charging, and those models are just getting going now operationally. So that's quite a nice example of where you can combine technologies to get, because obviously the challenge with renewables being that they're fluctuating in their supply. So we're very much focused on that kind of that as an opportunity.
In terms of batteries, for what we're doing, we may well be looking at some sort of cross between a microgrid and a connection to the main grid, because if you've got a tower block that is 20 odd stories high, it's literally going to have to be completely rethought to take it into the future. That gives you all sorts of opportunities, and you may well be looking at something there. When you've got 8 tower blocks, as we've got, you've also got the issue of resilience between the blocks, because what you don't want is one block going down, quote unquote. You want to be able to actually balance it off against the other 7. So there's probably going to be some sort of balancing effect using batteries. And again, that is interesting to the academics and to industry, because it opens up a whole new way of retrofitting that picks off. If you can do it vertically, now you can start thinking about doing it horizontally.
Sorry, I've got the mic. I guess a question mostly for Helen, but for the others as well, I suppose. Just going back to the question of the change in government and the policy of kind of GB Energy, it's very reassuring to hear you sort of sound notes of optimism around it. And I don't want to kind of look a gift horse in the mouth too much. But, there has historically been a bit of a centralising tendency sometimes within the Labour Party, Labour governments. And I guess I just would be interested to hear more detail about the signals you're picking up. Are there particular kind of ministers, MPs, or people within that structure who kind of get the community a bit more? It just feels there might be a risk that a lot of that spending for the local and community goes to essentially local authorities and community. I'd just be interested in a bit more nuance around your take on that.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting question, and I guess I'm curious to find out how that's going to work out as well. I mean, there have been people in the Labour team, certainly in the run up to going into government, that really are really focused on community energy specifically, and I think that who was the Energy Shadow Minister, Alan Whitehead's been really strong on that, and I think that's been a real champion within the sort of Ed Miliband's team. Of course, he didn't stand again because he was retiring, basically, so that's a bit of a shame. But no, I mean, I think, look, we'll see, won't we? But what they have said is that they will channel, of the $1 billion a year, they've specifically said that they expect 600 million a year of that to be channeled through local authorities and 400 million a year to be channeled to community energy organisations. What we don't know yet is what's the mechanism, and that will be done somehow through GB Energy. We don't yet know. There is a mechanism that exists that's very tiny, that was set up under the previous government, where there's actually net zero hubs that are housed. I mean, what are there, 10 of them or something across the country? Our local one is housed with WECA, but it's much wider than the WECA area. It's for the southwest, that have been had a very small pot of money, £10 million, on a national level to feed into project development for community energy projects. And that, even just that, £10 million coming through that mechanism has really worked. We've accessed that. We've had 2 grants, each £40,000 to do early feasibility work to figure out whether a new idea we have of combining wind and small-scale ground mount of wind and solar and battery, to your question also, whether that can work, and also looking at local power clubs for local supply. And so that's the kind of work it's really, really hard for us to do without that kind of grant funding, because we just don't, we don't have that kind of money lying around. So that is proven, it is happening, but it's tiny. So there are, that is encouraging that there are mechanisms they could be putting that resources through that already are reaching the community sector. I mean, obviously, we're really hopeful that what will happen will be those mechanisms will be expanded and turbocharged and really get to where we need them to be.
If I can just add to that around Labour policy especially, it's like the questioner said, I don't want to look a gift horse in the face, but £1 billion is great. 600 million of that going to municipals and local authorities as grants. The other 400 go into community energy groups as loans. Yeah. I think that should have been, the other way round, basically. It's good news that, they're going to lax the laws, the planning laws on onshore wind, which is long overdue. But I do worry about their intended changes to planning laws when it comes to houses, and that the energy efficiency levels may drop to ensure, those houses are more cost effective for developers. But we live in hope.
And just to widen out slightly on that, there's a lot of talk about economic growth. There's also a lot of talk, interesting economic growth coming out of the health service, was being flagged up the other day. Most of the people that I deal with are suffering or potentially going to suffer from chronic long-term health problems from living in damp, mouldy flats. And that is something which has to be addressed. And if we're going to have a just transition, then in fact we should be starting with that accommodation first. I'm an owner-occupier. I've been around long enough to have paid off the mortgage, which probably means most of you hate me. And we've spent a lot of time and effort on upgrading the insulation in our terrace property. And as a consequence, even in the height of winter, the heating goes on half an hour morning and evening. So I get all the benefits. If I was a tenant, there's no guarantee, even if the property is upgraded, if the heating system is upgraded, that I personally benefit, or rather, what Mark alluded to, the rent goes up. And it's almost another equivalent to the people who are leaseholders. And if you want the people who are really caught in the trap, it's the leaseholding shared ownership, because they have a mortgage, and they are also responsible for doing their repairs, but they can't do anything to the structure of the building, and it's communal heating, and so on and so forth. And all of that has got to be worked out now if we are genuinely going to have a just transition. And all of it actually feeds back most effectively into small, locally based community energy schemes that actually tackle the problem on the ground as seen by the person on the ground. Because we're all forgetting something in the time that Mark's been working on this project. We've had a revolution in our pockets. It's called the mobile phone. And if you increasingly in every aspect of your life, you're being asked your opinion on something by somebody trying to sell you something, it's only our political system that still says, you get to vote for me when I tell you you can vote for me. After you voted, I'll do what I like. Which is how a lot of people see the system, and it's why they're disengaging. And community energy is a brilliant way of bringing it back full circle, because it does affect the pound in your pocket. It does affect how cold, warm, damp, whatever your house is. And if your child picks up pneumonia-based or asthma-based illnesses, as a child, they will carry that with them for their entire life, and that will have an impact on the health service. It will have an impact on everything else that goes through. It generates generational poverty. And we can break that. And that's a big driver, I suspect, for most of the people in this room.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I don't think we've got time for any more questions, but just a round of applause, please, for our panel.